If anyone wants to start a petition to have Samara Weaving in every horror movie, I will be the first to sign it. Welcome back to The Haunted Beard, everybody. My name is Jake. Thank you for joining me. Azrael is a horror film directed by E.L. Katz, starring, of course, Samara Weaving. And this is a movie I was looking forward to and have been anticipating for a few months now, as this came out earlier in the year, a few months back or so, but finally became available, just dropped on SHUDDER. And so was definitely looking forward to this one and wanted to give you some thoughts, so here we go. In a world where no one speaks, a devout female-led community hunts down a young woman who has escaped imprisonment. And Azrael's escape has accelerated a vicious showdown between the very forces of good and evil. Now, I was interested in this one because obviously you've got Samara Weaving in a horror film, also the director too. I've seen some of Katz's other work and have been pretty impressed with it. I enjoyed it for the most part. And so in addition to that, really the concept and the idea of the film intrigued me. And then also learning that this takes place in a world where no one talks. So there was no speaking, no talking in this movie, no dialogue at all. I was very curious to see how they were going to implement that sort of idea. And overall, I was pretty mixed on how they went about executing the no dialogue. But I will say I lean still a little bit more towards the positive side, but let's get into a little bit more. First of all, this takes place in a post-apocalyptic type of world. Actually, it's after the Rapture, which is this belief in Christianity, at least some Christians believe, that upon the return of Christ, those who are faithful to Christ will ascend into heaven with Christ and will be taken away from this world, and those who are not faithful will be left behind. And so here we are in this world, a post-rapture world with these people who have been left behind. And I wish they would have leaned into that a little bit more. I feel like that sort of post-rapture idea really just mainly serves as kind of the backdrop and doesn't factor much into the story that ultimately unfolds throughout the film. But that kind of largely speaks to my overall kind of more mixed feelings with the film as a whole. And it has to do with this feeling of wishing we would have gotten a little bit more exposition or context to things. That's not typically a criticism I give very often. Oftentimes it's like, oh, there's too much exposition. This is a film that I feel like it could have used a little bit more to kind of open things up. And that speaks to how they implement the no speaking and the no dialogue. And while I think that has some positive aspects to it, it also has some more mixed and negative aspects to it as well. In some ways, I like that there's no talking because it creates mystery and intrigue, and it's all visual storytelling, which I find typically pretty engaging. And so the filmmakers here have to really trust their audience. They have to trust that they're conveying the story in a way to where we can follow it and understand what's going on. And I think for the most part, they do a pretty good job at that. However, due to the lack of context and exposition, some of it feels like we're not maybe as fully invested in this world or in this story as we possibly could be if we just had a little bit more information that was given to us. And I feel like this concept of making a quote-unquote kind of silent film or a sort of a modern silent film kind of thing, it has a little bit of a gimmicky type feeling to it, to where it almost feels like, you know, the filmmakers started off with, hey, let's make a silent movie, and then sort of wrote the story out of that. Whereas other films that have kind of done this, with the big obvious example being A Quiet Place, they kind of use the lack of talking to sort of serve the story instead of making the lack of talking kind of the main thrust of the story. This is a world where the lack of talking almost feels like an unnecessary aspect of the world, to where like the reason why these people have for not talking is just that they decided to take this kind of vow of silence to avoid sinful speech, which it's kind of like, all right, I guess, but I don't know. It doesn't really have as much of a meaningful reason for there to be no talking as something like A Quiet Place does. And so that's kind of a little bit more of a mixed element for me. I can respect the filmmakers for kind of experimenting a little bit in kind of making it difficult on themselves to see, what they're able to do and how they're kind of able to execute this concept. And again, it's not all bad. There are some elements that I think work pretty well, but also as it relates to the story, because when you can't have any sort of talking, it also kind of limits, again, how deep or involved you're able to make the story. And so the story here feels a bit repetitive, because essentially what you have is an 80-minute movie of Samara Weaving escaping and then being captured, and then escaping again and being captured again, and escaping again and being captured again. This is a movie that, on further reflection, I can certainly see some of the issues narratively and some of the issues with the silent, type presentation that it presents. And I fully acknowledge all that, and obviously just talked about it a little bit. But it's a movie that I still, kind of my emotional reaction to it, I still actually enjoyed this and had a pretty good time with it, despite some of the issues that I just talked about. And I think mainly that's because of Samara Weaving's performance and her character, and just kind of the thrill ride of the journey that this movie takes us on for 80 minutes. So first and foremost, Samara Weaving she's pretty great in this. What she's able to do without saying a single word. And I can fully acknowledge that this film has a lack of character development, which 99 times out of 100, I'm typically going to have an issue with, but I feel like this is kind of one of those rare exceptions. And obviously the lack of development has to do with the fact that you don't get any words. But this is a setup where we don't really need to know a whole lot about her character. This is a person who is trying to be reunited with the person that she loves, and she is a fighter and she is a survivor, and is just trying to get back to her loved one and survive. And that's something that I think pretty much everybody can relate to, at least to some degree or another. And so here you have this woman that's just in this crazy, intense, wild situation, just fighting for survival. And that's kind of enough to get us attached to her. And what Weaving is able to do, given her restrictions and everything, I can admire her just taking kind of a risk here and taking a chance in doing a project like this. And I think she pretty much knocks it out of the park. Everything has to be done visually. Everything has to be done with emotions and the looks of her eyes and facial expressions. It's all physical acting, and she does a really great job. There's some really cool fight sequences in here, and the whole climactic sequence is pretty fantastic. There is a moment where she crawls up out of the ground, covered in blood, and has just this look of pure vengeance in her eyes. And at that point, I couldn't help but, get a big old smile on my face, and I was like, let's go. And so, yeah, she's pretty great in this. I thoroughly enjoyed her performance. Watching Samara Weaving going on this mission of revenge is just quite a bit of fun. I also really liked the look and the design of the creatures in this. I had no idea there was anything along those lines in this movie, and so that was kind of a complete and total surprise for me. And so that was really cool. You get some pretty gnarly, gory, and bloody scenes with these creatures, and so I thought the way they implemented them was pretty effective and was one of the highlights for me. And overall, I enjoyed the thrill ride that this story is. As kind of repetitive as it gets, there was something about it that really kind of kept me interested and curious to see what was going to happen and where it was going to go. There's just something about this fairly simple kind of survival revenge story that I found to be pretty fun, and for the most part had a pretty good time with. And finally, the note that the film ends on, I couldn't help but kind of be interested and curious in potentially exploring this world a little bit more. However, the same sort of issues that I just talked about, I feel like would still be prevalent in a sequel kind of thing. And so it's like, this world is interesting to me, and there's things that I would like to know about it, but I don't know how we would ever get the information given the sort of setup that we have, if that makes sense. And so, yeah, it's kind of overall a little more mixed, but I still largely I enjoyed Samara's performance, and I enjoyed the kind of survival revenge story and the journey of it all. So, overall for me, I'm going to be kind of like, I don't know, 6.5, maybe a 7, something like that for me. I had a pretty good time despite some of the issues that I talked about. So anyways, those are my thoughts. I feel like people are kind of more mixed on this one. I feel like the reviews are pretty kind of widespread. So I'd be very curious to hear your guys' thoughts. Let me know what you thought of Azrael down below. Always interested in hearing your guys' thoughts. So that's all I got. Thank you so much for watching. Greatly appreciate it. If you got anything out of this video, go ahead and do me a favor and do not click that subscribe button unless you want to be haunted by the beard.